It was a Saturday morning that should have been ordinary. March 16th, 1991. Los Angeles was already warming under a pale California sun, and the sound of early buses rolled through the south-central neighborhood like any other weekend. But inside a small convenience store called Empire Liquor Market and Deli, a 15-year-old girl's life would be cut short in a moment that stunned the city and left scars that would echo for decades. Before diving in, don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell to stay updated on our latest cold case stories. Her name was Latasha Harlins, a bright, determined teenager known for her shy smile, her ambition, and her deep love for her family. Latasha lived with her grandmother, Ruth Harlins, after losing both her parents to tragedy. Her mother had been murdered in 1985, and her father passed away soon after. Despite this painful past, Latasha carried herself with resilience. She attended Westchester High School, earned good grades, and dreamed of becoming a lawyer. To friends, she was soft-spoken yet strong, a girl who worked hard, loved basketball, and often talked about wanting to make her family proud. In 1991, South Central Los Angeles was a community burdened by economic strain and racial tension. The crack epidemic and rising unemployment had fractured neighborhoods, and relations between Korean American store owners and black residents were often strained by misunderstanding and fear. The city simmered beneath the surface, frustration building quietly, waiting for a spark. On that March morning, Latasha walked to the nearby Empire Liquor Market, a small store on Figueroa Street, just a few blocks from her home. She carried a backpack with 2 crumpled dollar bills inside and planned to buy a bottle of orange juice before heading to the local store to meet friends. Surveillance footage would later show her entering the store calmly, moving straight to the counter with the juice in her hand. Behind the counter was Soonja Do, a 51-year-old Korean-American woman who co-owned the market with her husband. The footage captured what appeared to be a brief misunderstanding, one that would escalate with devastating speed. Do reportedly believed that Latasha was attempting to steal the juice, though witnesses would later testify that Latasha held the money in plain sight. Words were exchanged, sharp, defensive, and tense. Seconds later, the security camera recorded a scuffle. Latasha turned to walk away, the orange juice still in her hand. And then, in a single, irreversible moment, Do reached for a revolver kept under the counter and pulled the trigger. The bullet struck Latasha in the back of the head. She died instantly, collapsing just a few feet from the door. The orange juice, still clutched in her hand, rolled across the floor. What could have happened in that brief moment to change everything so suddenly? Outside, people began to gather as news spread through the neighborhood. The sound of police sirens cut through the quiet morning air. Officers quickly cordoned off the small market, and inside, paramedics pronounced Latasha dead at the scene. The reality of what had happened, a child shot over a bottle of orange juice, felt incomprehensible. Soon, Do was arrested that same morning and charged with voluntary manslaughter. Her husband, who had witnessed the aftermath, was reportedly distraught, insisting that his wife had acted out of fear. But for the community, fear didn't excuse the loss. Within hours, anger began to ripple through South Central. To many, Latasha's death wasn't just a tragedy. It was a symbol of deeper pain, of years of tension between store owners and the black community, of distrust that had never been addressed. News reports spread quickly. Television cameras captured crowds gathering outside the store, some holding handwritten signs demanding justice. Others wept openly, unable to believe that a teenager could be killed so casually. Latasha's classmates left flowers and cards on the steps of her grandmother's home. Her teachers described her as bright, focused, and so full of promise. Her family, already broken by past losses, now faced another unbearable one. In the weeks that followed, the city mourned, but also simmered. The story was everywhere. A 15-year-old honor student, unarmed and buying juice, shot in the back of the head by a shopkeeper. To many, it was clear that Latasha had posed no threat. The surveillance footage confirmed it. Yet some voices in the media framed the tragedy as a misunderstanding, one inflamed by fear and miscommunication. The public watched closely as the legal process began, hoping for justice that could somehow make sense of the senseless. At this point in the story, one question haunted the community. Would the system deliver justice for Latasha Harlins, or would her death become another wound left open and ignored? As weeks turned into months, the courtroom became the focal point of national attention. Reporters packed the gallery, civil rights activists organized demonstrations, and Latasha's grandmother sat silently through each hearing, clutching a photograph of her granddaughter in a white dress. Every word spoken in court mattered. Every testimony carried the weight of a community's grief and expectation. Outside the courthouse, murals began to appear, bright colors against gray concrete. Memorials painted by artists who refused to let Latasha's face be forgotten. Her image, framed by wings or surrounded by orange juice bottles, became a symbol not only of loss, but of resilience. Children walked past those murals on their way to school, learning her name even if they hadn't known her life. The trial that followed would expose deep cracks in the city's justice system and ignite outrage that would later intertwine with another national tragedy, the beating of Rodney King. The two stories, though separate, became threads in the same tapestry of racial injustice and frustration that would eventually erupt into the 1992 Los Angeles uprising. But in 1991, before the protests, before the verdict, before the headlines turned into history, there was still only grief. A grandmother who had buried her daughter now faced the unbearable task of burying her granddaughter. And a city already fractured by poverty and prejudice braced itself for the outcome of a case that would test the meaning of justice itself. In South Central Los Angeles, the echoes of that gunshot would never truly fade. And for those who remember that morning, the image of a young girl, backpack slung over her shoulder, a bottle of juice in hand, remains one of the most haunting reminders of how quickly innocence can be stolen. As detectives processed the scene and reporters arrived, the community's demand for answers grew louder. What investigators uncovered about the confrontation, and how prosecutors would later handle the case, would determine whether the city found justice or faced a new wave of anger. The sound of sirens pierced the stillness of that Saturday morning, weaving through the streets of South Central Los Angeles. Neighbors, drawn by curiosity and alarm, gathered outside the Empire Liquor Market. The storefront, once a place of mundane errands and everyday interactions, had become the scene of a tragedy that none could ignore. A teenage girl had been killed over a bottle of orange juice, and the city would never see this morning in the same way again. Detectives arrived quickly, taking control of the scene. Forensic teams photographed the interior, noting the position of the body, the overturned orange juice bottle, and the crumpled bills still clutched in Latasha's hand. The surveillance camera above the counter had captured the fatal moments, providing investigators with a clear timeline of the confrontation. Within hours, the coroner had confirmed the obvious. Latasha Harlins was dead from a single gunshot wound to the back of the head. The news spread rapidly, first through word of mouth in the tight-knit community, and then through local media. Residents struggled to comprehend the reality. How could a 15-year-old girl, known and loved by so many, have her life ended in a matter of seconds over such a minor misunderstanding? Parents whispered warnings to their children. Community leaders convened informal meetings, and local clergy began preparing prayers and vigils. Latasha's grandmother, Ruth Harlins, became the immediate focal point for grief and frustration. She sat beside the body as officers worked, offering both her presence and her quiet anguish. When journalists later asked her for comment, she could barely speak, often dissolving into tears. "She didn't deserve this," Ruth said repeatedly. "She was my baby. She was just a child. She didn't deserve to die like this." Her words, raw and unfiltered, captured the collective heartbreak of a neighborhood that had already endured more than its share of loss. Community organizations quickly mobilized. The Los Angeles chapter of the NAACP, alongside local advocacy groups, began demanding a thorough investigation and justice for Latasha. Flyers, newspaper ads, and radio announcements called attention to the case. Students at nearby schools held impromptu vigils, and murals began appearing in the community, Latasha's image painted in bold colors on walls and fences, immortalizing her smile and her innocence for all who passed by. The Los Angeles Police Department, LAPD, aware of the high-profile nature of the case, treated it with urgency. Officers interviewed witnesses, neighbors, and store patrons, confirming the basic facts. Latasha had entered the store with money in hand, intended to purchase a bottle of orange juice, and was shot after a brief verbal confrontation. Soon, Jae Do, the store owner, was detained immediately and charged with voluntary manslaughter. Investigators faced a unique challenge. While the surveillance footage captured the act clearly, the social dynamics surrounding the case were complex. Tensions between Korean-American store owners and Black residents had been mounting for years, exacerbated by cultural misunderstandings and socioeconomic stressors. Law enforcement had to navigate these sensitive issues while ensuring that the investigation remained strictly fact-based and evidence-driven. During the initial interviews, police also had to reconcile contradictory witness accounts. Some recalled hearing raised voices. Others described seeing the scuffle but noted that Latasha appeared unarmed and cooperative. All witnesses confirmed, however, that she had money in her hand and was attempting to complete her purchase. The coroner's report later confirmed that she had 2 $1 bills in her hand at the time of her death, underscoring that she posed no immediate threat to the store owner. As news coverage expanded, the media began highlighting the broader social implications of the tragedy. Articles in the Los Angeles Times, local television news reports, and national coverage emphasized the stark contrast between the perceived threat and the actual circumstances of the shooting. Public outrage grew as citizens realized that a child had been killed in an incident that might have been preventable. Community members organized vigils and marches in the weeks following Latasha's death. Residents gathered at the store, at local parks, and at churches, holding candles and flowers. During these gatherings, speakers emphasized the need for justice, not only in this case but in addressing the wider pattern of tension and mistrust that had long existed in the area. Latasha's story became emblematic of the fragile trust between communities, highlighting systemic issues that went beyond a single act of violence. Legal preparations began almost immediately. Prosecutors reviewed the surveillance tape frame by frame, confirming the sequence of events. They collected statements from all eyewitnesses, including store employees and neighbors. The investigation was meticulous, every detail scrutinized to ensure that the case would withstand scrutiny in court. Law enforcement officials were acutely aware of the national attention the trial would attract. Given the proximity to the Rodney King beating and the already heightened awareness of racial injustice in Los Angeles. Yet, despite the thorough investigation, some in the community remained skeptical. They questioned whether justice could truly be served in a system they felt often failed Black residents. These doubts would later be amplified when the sentencing of Soon-Ja Do shocked many, but at this stage, the focus remained squarely on uncovering the truth. Who was responsible, and how could the law respond appropriately? Investigators also began to document the broader context. They noted previous incidents at the store, interactions between patrons and employees, and neighborhood tensions that may have contributed to the confrontation. While these factors were contextual, they were carefully documented to inform the legal strategy and to provide a comprehensive picture of the circumstances surrounding Latasha's death. By the end of March 1991, the case had moved fully into the courtroom. The investigation had established a clear chain of events. Latasha Harlins, a 15-year-old student, entered the Empire Liquor Market with money in hand, engaged in a brief verbal exchange with the store owner, and was shot in the back of the head. Every piece of evidence, the surveillance footage, witness testimony, coroner's report, confirmed the tragic reality of her death. But even as the facts were documented, a second, more pervasive question arose among residents and the wider public. How could such a tragedy occur in a community already grappling with systemic inequities? How could a life so young, full of potential and promise, be ended in an instant over a bottle of orange juice? At this point in the narrative, viewers are left to reflect. If you had been present that day, witnessing the events unfold, what would you have suspected first? Could anyone have foreseen such a fatal outcome in such a brief moment? The investigation had produced clarity about the who, what, and where, but the why remained tangled with social, racial, and economic factors that would continue to shape discourse in Los Angeles for years to come. It was clear that the murder of Latasha Harlins was not only a criminal act, but also a profound reflection of societal tensions, a truth that would resonate far beyond the walls of the small convenience store. The immediate aftermath and meticulous investigation set the stage for a trial that would capture the attention of a city and a nation. But before the courtroom proceedings could begin, the impact on the community, the media attention, and the emotional toll on Latasha's family would make this more than a story of a tragic death. It would become a story of collective grief, accountability, and the search for justice. In the days following the tragic shooting of Latasha Harlins, Los Angeles was a city still processing shock and disbelief. The morning of March 16th had ended with the community in mourning, and a teenager's life abruptly extinguished over a transaction so ordinary it seemed unimaginable. But while grief settled over South Central, the wheels of law enforcement and the judicial system began to turn. Detectives assigned to the case approached the investigation with urgency. The first task was meticulous documentation of the crime scene. Photographs captured every angle: Latasha's position on the floor, the spilled orange juice, the crumpled bills in her hand, and the counter where the fatal shot had been fired. Officers noted every detail: the store layout, the placement of the weapon, and the trajectory of the bullet, to establish a precise timeline of events. Surveillance footage from the store's camera became the centerpiece of the investigation, allowing detectives to reconstruct the final moments with accuracy. Witnesses were identified and interviewed immediately. Some were neighbors who had heard the shot and rushed outside. Others were patrons or passers-by who had entered the store in the moments before the shooting. Each account, while varying slightly in perspective, confirmed the same essential facts. Latasha had entered the store with money in her hand, selected a bottle of orange juice, and became involved in a brief confrontation with the store owner, Sunja Du. Within seconds, the encounter escalated, resulting in the fatal shot. Investigators also gathered statements from store employees, including Du's husband, who witnessed the act but did not intervene. His account reinforced the events captured on camera, providing context to the sequence of actions that led to Latasha's death. Throughout these interviews, detectives maintained a strictly factual approach, carefully separating verified observations from speculation or opinion. Meanwhile, the media began documenting the case extensively. Local newspapers, including the Los Angeles Times, reported on both the incident and the emerging social implications. Television crews filmed the store, the neighborhood, and gatherings of grieving residents. News coverage emphasized the tragic irony: a 15-year-old student carrying money to make a small purchase, shot dead over an orange juice bottle. The story quickly gained national attention, bringing focus to both the immediate circumstances and the broader context of racial tension in South Central Los Angeles. The investigation also examined the background of Sunja Du. Law enforcement reviewed her past interactions with customers, store policies, and previous incidents at the market. The goal was not to assume motive, but to provide a comprehensive picture for potential legal proceedings. Investigators noted that the store had been situated in a neighborhood where disputes between patrons and store owners, while rare, had occasionally escalated. These details, while contextual, helped establish the environment in which the fatal encounter occurred. Throughout March and April 1991, the coroner's report was finalized and made available to prosecutors. It confirmed that Latasha had died from a single gunshot wound to the back of the head. Toxicology reports indicated no substances that could have impaired judgment on her part. The evidence was clear, the timeline established, and the surveillance footage unambiguous. Investigators had assembled a detailed record. Latasha had posed no physical threat, carried money in her hand, and had been shot while exiting the store. Public attention, however, complicated the investigative landscape. Residents and community leaders demanded swift justice, while others debated the role of fear and perceived threat in Du's actions. Local activists organized meetings and rallies to highlight the broader social dynamics that had contributed to tension between the Korean-American business community and Black residents. Law enforcement had to navigate this public scrutiny carefully, ensuring that investigative integrity remained paramount while acknowledging the palpable societal context. Prosecutors, working closely with detectives, began building the case. The evidence was straightforward, but needed to be presented with precision. The video footage, the coroner's report, witness statements, and the statements of the store's employees. Every piece of information was cataloged and cross-referenced to ensure consistency. The goal was clear: establish a chain of factual events that could support charges in a court of law. Despite the clarity of the evidence, the investigation faced challenges. Some questioned whether Du had acted out of fear, claiming that she believed Latasha intended to steal the juice. Others argued that the response was disproportionate, emphasizing that Latasha's money was visible and that a single gunshot to the back of the head was in no way justified. These competing perspectives did not alter the facts, but reflected the deep societal tensions at play, tensions that the investigation had to consider, if only to contextualize the broader ramifications of the case. Legal strategists also prepared for the courtroom dynamics. They anticipated that the case would not only hinge on the act itself, but also on public perception, racial context, and prior incidents that might inform the jury. Prosecutors and investigators recognized that this case would be scrutinized beyond the facts of the shooting. It would be a focal point for a city already sensitive to issues of justice, race, and inequality. The investigation further included careful cataloging of all physical evidence: the revolver used by Du, the orange juice bottle, and the crumpled bills. Photographs and video evidence were backed by official reports, creating a comprehensive record for the court. Investigators also coordinated with legal teams to ensure that every step of evidence handling complied with protocol, leaving no room for procedural error that could compromise the case. As the investigation unfolded, detectives observed the neighborhood, noting patterns of activity and interactions that might inform understanding of the incident. These observations were factual, restrained, and aimed at providing context rather than explanation. The investigators' meticulous approach ensured that, when the case eventually reached trial, every claim could be substantiated by verifiable evidence. Throughout this process, the grief of Latasha's family remained a visible element. Ruth Harlins, her grandmother, attended briefings with detectives, ensuring that she was informed and included in the investigative process. Her presence, along with the community's attention, highlighted the human impact of the crime, reminding investigators and officials alike that beyond the facts, this was a tragedy that had ripped apart a family and a neighborhood. Months passed, and while the investigation produced a clear record of events, the case's broader resonance grew. Community leaders, journalists, and activists continued to frame Latasha's death not simply as a singular act of violence, but as a symbol of a larger set of societal challenges. This public attention, while external to the investigative process, underscored the stakes, that the forthcoming trial would be judged both legally and morally by a community seeking answers and accountability. By late 1991, the case had reached the prosecutor's office in full. Investigators had compiled every statement, photograph, and piece of video footage. The sequence of events was documented in detail: Latasha's entrance into the store, her selection of the juice, the brief verbal confrontation, her turning to exit, and the fatal gunshot. All evidence converged on one indisputable fact: a 15-year-old girl had been shot while attempting to complete a simple purchase, and she posed no physical threat to the shooter. The investigation had illuminated what had happened. What remained uncertain, however, was how the legal system would interpret the evidence, and whether the courtroom could deliver a sense of justice that matched the public's expectations. It was clear that the subsequent trial would not simply assess the facts of the shooting, but also confront the broader questions of fairness, racial tension, and societal accountability. And so, as detectives closed their files and prosecutors prepared for court, the city held its breath. The meticulous investigation had done its part. Every angle documented, every witness interviewed, every frame of footage reviewed. But now, the next stage of the story would begin. The courtroom, where the law would weigh the evidence and where the public would confront the outcome. The question lingered. After all those months of investigation, could the justice system truly reconcile the facts with the grief and outrage of a community that had lost one of its own? As the trial approached, the stage was set for a legal reckoning. The courtroom would soon become the center of a city's collective attention, where evidence, testimony, and societal reflection would collide, bringing Latasha Harlins' story to the forefront of Los Angeles history and raising questions that would resonate far beyond her death. The months of investigation, meticulous evidence collection, and community attention all converged in the walls of the Los Angeles courtroom. For Latasha Harlins' family, neighbors, and the city at large, this trial was far more than a legal proceeding. It was the culmination of grief, outrage, and the hope that justice could provide at least some measure of acknowledgement for a life so abruptly taken. As the courtroom filled, the weight of expectation was palpable. Prosecutors systematically presented their case, relying heavily on the surveillance footage that had captured every moment leading to Latasha's death. The video showed a 15-year-old girl entering the Empire Liquor Market, holding money in her hand, selecting a bottle of orange juice, and turning to leave after a brief verbal exchange with the store owner, Soon Jadu. Then came the fatal gunshot, sudden, violent, and irreversible. Each frame was examined with precision, leaving little room for ambiguity. Witnesses provided testimony that corroborated the footage. Neighbors, store patrons, and employees described the incident with factual clarity. Latasha posed no threat, carried money for her purchase, and was unarmed. Their statements established a consistent narrative, reinforcing the objective reality of what had occurred. The coroner's report further confirmed the fatal trajectory of the single gunshot wound, leaving no question about the lethality of the act. The defense framed Du's actions as a moment of panic, a perceived threat that prompted a split-second response. Attorneys emphasized that she believed Latasha intended to steal from the store and that fear had dictated her actions. While the argument sought to contextualize the shooting, the jury was presented with the stark contrast. An unarmed teenager with money in hand, shot in a situation that could have been de-escalated. The city watched closely. Reporters from local newspapers, including the Los Angeles Times, as well as national media outlets, covered each day of the proceedings. Television crews broadcast segments of the trial, and community members filled the courtroom and its surrounding halls. Outside, vigils and gatherings reflected a city grappling with loss, outrage, and questions about fairness and accountability. Murals honoring Latasha began to appear, small acts of remembrance that testified to her life and to the collective grief of a community. After deliberation, the jury returned a verdict. Soon, Jadu was convicted of voluntary manslaughter and sentenced to 10 years in state prison, with eligibility for parole after 5 years. The sentence sparked immediate public debate. Many in the Black community argued that the punishment was insufficient given the circumstances of Latasha's death, a child killed over a purchase of orange juice. Civic leaders and activists emphasized that the sentence, while legally appropriate, did not fully convey the moral weight of the act. Others, particularly in the Korean American community, acknowledged the legal decision, emphasizing Du's claimed perception of threat and the need for procedural justice. For Latasha's family, the verdict brought a complex mix of emotions. Ruth Harlins, her grandmother, expressed relief that the legal system had formally recognized wrongdoing and established accountability, Yet she acknowledged that no conviction could restore her granddaughter's life. Her words resonated with the community. "Justice has been done in the eyes of the law, but it cannot bring my granddaughter back." This duality, formal justice and enduring grief, underscored the limitations of the legal system when confronted with profound human loss. Beyond the courtroom, the case ignited broader societal reflection. Discussions of racial tension, urban violence, and community safety dominated news cycles. Scholars, journalists, and social commentators analyzed the dynamics of fear, perception, and response that led to Latasha's death. The incident became emblematic of the challenges faced in communities where cultural misunderstanding and historical tensions could escalate into tragedy. The trial also became a teaching moment, both formally and informally. Schools, community organizations, and civic groups used the case to illustrate the consequences of impulsive actions, the critical importance of de-escalation, and the impact of systemic social divides. Latasha's story became a reference point for ongoing conversations about responsibility, accountability, and the human cost of violence. Memorials and community tributes continued in the years that followed. Murals and portraits of Latasha appeared across south-central Los Angeles, serving as daily reminders of her life, her potential, and the abruptness of her loss. Vigils commemorated anniversaries, keeping her memory alive while inspiring reflection on broader societal lessons. Her name became a symbol of vigilance, resilience, and the ongoing pursuit of justice in communities historically impacted by tension and misunderstanding. While the legal system had delivered a verdict and formal accountability, the emotional and moral conversation continued. For many, the trial exposed a larger question. How does society reconcile the letter of the law with the emotional truth of a community's grief? How can justice, while procedurally sound, fully address the moral dimensions of loss, particularly when a child's life has been taken? These questions became part of Latasha Harlins' enduring legacy, extending her story far beyond the events of March 16, 1991. For viewers today, the lesson is clear. Justice is multifaceted. It is both the process that holds individuals accountable and the reflection that challenges society to learn, grow, and prevent future tragedy. Latasha's death remains a stark reminder of the consequences of fear, the fragility of life, and the enduring importance of empathy and understanding. As Los Angeles continues to evolve, the case of Latasha Harlins endures as a symbol, a testimony to a life cut short, a family's resilience, and a city's ongoing struggle to reconcile law, morality, and social justice. The breakthrough had occurred. Formal justice had been delivered. The resolution was documented. Yet the conversation, the reflection, learning, and cultural reckoning continues to this day. The story of Latasha Harlins did not conclude with a verdict or a sentence. While the legal system formally addressed the act that ended her life, the ripples of her death extended far beyond the courtroom walls, touching families, communities, and the very fabric of Los Angeles itself. For the Harlins family, for residents of South Central Los Angeles, and for the broader nation, Latasha's death became both a personal tragedy and a symbol of larger societal tensions, a reminder that the consequences of fear, misunderstanding, and split-second decisions can be profound and irreversible. In the weeks and months following the trial, the grief of Latasha's family remained both private and public. Ruth Harlins, her grandmother, became the emotional anchor, attending memorials, speaking with reporters, and participating in community discussions about youth safety and justice. Friends and extended family shared their memories of Latasha, a bright, caring teenager with a quick smile and a strong sense of independence, who navigated her daily life with a maturity beyond her years. Each story painted a picture of a young life filled with potential, abruptly stolen in a moment that could have been prevented. Community response was immediate and intense. Murals honoring Latasha appeared in South Central Los Angeles, each one a visual testament to her memory and to the collective grief of the neighborhood. Artists worked with families and local organizations to ensure the murals reflected her personality, her life, and the broader context of the tragedy. These artistic tributes became more than memorials. They were sites of reflection, education, and community dialogue. Residents gathered to maintain them, organize small vigils, and discuss ways to prevent similar incidents in the future. In these gatherings, the story of Latasha was retold, her humanity reaffirmed, and lessons about empathy, communication, and de-escalation were emphasized. The impact of Latasha's death also reached the media and national discourse. Newspapers, television programs, and scholarly analyses highlighted the tragedy, not just as an individual event, but as a reflection of broader societal challenges. Editorials debated the intersection of race, fear, and urban life. Analysts examined the dynamics between South Central Los Angeles Black community and the Korean-American business community, framing Latasha's death within the ongoing dialogue about cultural misunderstanding, systemic inequities, and the consequences of mistrust in urban neighborhoods. Her story became a reference point for discussions on juvenile vulnerability, the use of lethal force, and the responsibilities of adults in positions of authority within communities. Schools and community organizations incorporated the lessons of Latasha's story into educational programs. Workshops emphasized conflict resolution, empathy, and the importance of safe environments for youth. Civic groups used her case as an example in youth advocacy initiatives, teaching children and teenagers about the consequences of fear-driven actions and the power of calm, reasoned responses in tense situations. For many, Latasha's life became a silent teacher, her experiences a way to engage younger generations in discussions about responsibility, community safety, and justice. The legal outcome, the conviction of Soon Ja-doo and the sentence of 10 years in state prison with eligibility for parole after 5, provided formal accountability, yet it also highlighted the limitations of the law in delivering emotional or moral closure. Community members expressed frustration, debating whether justice had truly been served. Some felt the sentence did not reflect the gravity of taking a child's life, while others recognized the legal rationale behind the ruling. This tension underscored a critical societal reality. Justice, while measurable in the courtroom, is multifaceted in its emotional and social implications. The Harlins family's grief, combined with widespread public reflection, highlighted the gap between legal judgment and moral reconciliation. Over the years, Latasha's story became intertwined with broader historical narratives. Her death occurred against a backdrop of rising racial tensions, economic inequality, and strained relationships between communities and law enforcement in Los Angeles. Scholars and social commentators frequently cite her case in discussions of the 1992 Los Angeles riots, contextualizing the unrest that followed as a culmination of systemic frustrations, inequalities, and unresolved grievances. In this way, Latasha's death served as both a personal tragedy and a societal lens, offering insight into the complex dynamics that shape urban life and community interactions. Media coverage continued to examine her story long after the trial. Documentaries, news retrospectives, and academic analyses revisited the case, highlighting lessons about conflict resolution, youth protection, and cultural understanding. Each retelling reinforced the enduring relevance of her experience, reminding viewers that Latasha was more than a statistic or a headline. She was a young girl whose life had intrinsic value, whose story demanded recognition, and whose death prompted reflection and dialogue that spanned decades. The Harlins family actively engaged with these ongoing narratives, emphasizing education, awareness, and advocacy. Ruth Harlins spoke at community events, workshops, and panels, sharing the personal and societal lessons of her granddaughter's death. She consistently highlighted the importance of learning from tragedy, ensuring that the pain experienced by her family could inspire positive change in others. These efforts transformed personal grief into civic engagement, making Latasha's memory a force for community education, social responsibility, and moral reflection. Latasha's story also continues to inform legal and social discussions about the use of force in commercial settings, juvenile vulnerability, and the consequences of fear-based reactions. Her case is often referenced in law enforcement training, public safety workshops, and community dialogues, emphasizing the human impact of split-second decisions. It underscores the importance of empathy, awareness, and restraint in moments of perceived threat, lessons that remain profoundly relevant today. For viewers, Latasha Harlins' story raises enduring questions. How can communities reconcile legal justice with moral outrage? How do we prevent fear and misunderstanding from producing irreversible consequences? How can we honor lives lost by learning from the circumstances that led to their deaths? Her narrative challenges individuals and society alike to reflect on responsibility, empathy, and the structures that shape human behavior. Ultimately, the legacy of Latasha Harlins is not confined to the courtroom or to the years immediately following her death. Her story persists as a living reminder of the fragility of life, the importance of cultural understanding, and the enduring consequences of human action. Her memory continues to influence public discourse, community programs, education, and art, all reinforcing that her life, though tragically short, left a lasting imprint on countless lives. Murals, vigils, workshops, and memorials ensure that her presence is felt, not only as a symbol of loss, but as a guide toward empathy, awareness, and proactive societal engagement. Every story told, every discussion held, every young life educated about the lessons of her experience strengthens the enduring significance of Latasha's legacy. Her death is a reminder that justice extends beyond formal legal outcomes. It encompasses reflection, education, and the moral responsibility of communities and individuals. Latasha's story challenges us to consider how our actions, however small, affect those around us, and how vigilance, empathy, and understanding can prevent unnecessary tragedy. In remembering Latasha Harlins, we honor not only her life, but the lessons her death imparts. Her legacy continues to shape Los Angeles and beyond, providing a lens through which we can examine justice, societal responsibility, and the profound impact of human decisions. Her name is etched in memory. Murals, academic discussions, and community dialogue, ensuring that her life, her potential, and the lessons of her death will never be forgotten. Thank you for joining us on this journey into the search for justice and the untold stories behind each case. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel to follow more revealed crime stories, and we'll see you in the next one.